Welcome to the Wild Type Podcast. I'm Neptune the Chameleon.
I'm Lyssa Lizards.
And we're your reptile girlies.
This one's for the wild type of girls.
Happy Tuesday, guys.
Happy Tuesday. It is freaking cold outside.
Yeah.
And I hate everything.
Yeah, it's very cold. I may or may not have been drinking some hot cocoa before this episode.
She texted me right before she came over and was like, do you have any hot cocoa? And I was like, I wish, but I have lots of coffee, which you don't like.
No. I was also out of marshmallow, so this is just good old hot chocolate. But I'm definitely a mini marshmallow.
Oh, for sure.
Candy cane, whipped cream. Like, I'll dress up my
we have
hot cocoa.
We have 100% determined that you are the sweets person. We know.
Any excuse to have mini marshmallows.
Put the sweets in there wherever you can. I get it.
I'm all about it. I always have a can of whipped cream in my refrigerator at all times.
Logan's my husband. We were actually talking about this yesterday because we wanted some Cool Whip to like go on something we were having for dessert yesterday. And I was like, we just need to always have Cool Whip in our fridge, always.
Do you think there's like two types of people, a Cool Whip person and a Ready Whip person?
Actually, probably.
So you guys are team Cool Whip?
I'm team Cool Whip because I like frozen Cool Whip.
Oh, yeah.
That's why
we always
I like
have
Cool
it in the
Whip.
freezer growing up.
Yeah, because then like you put that in your coffee or you put that in your hot cocoa. Like,
I can see. It's basically like little ice cream.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't put your canister of whipped cream in the freezer.
I am also team, what is it? Ready Whip? Is that
that's
the brand?
Like that's the brand of like
yeah. So I'm also team that, but I like the one that's extra creamy. That's the best one.
The blue one.
Yes. That on.
What does that mean if I knew exactly what color?
It's blue. It's absolutely.
What does that say about me and my whipped cream knowledge?
Oh, that is the best on like pies and stuff. Like during Thanksgiving.
It is
season.
Extra creamy. Like it is actually extra creamy. It does make a difference.
So good. I don't know what chemicals are in there to make it taste delicious, but
don't question it.
Don't
worry about it. Well, now you guys can enjoy that little chit chat on whipped cream and Cool Whip and hot cocoa, but. Today we're talking about breeders, which if you're in the reptile hobby, you're either considering breeding, you purchase from a breeder, you know breeders. Like this is a huge part of the hobby.
It's a giant chunk of the hobby.
Yeah.
The hobby wouldn't exist without breeders in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So.
Obviously, we're keepers. We are not currently
No.
breeders, but we figured through this episode we can kind of share with you guys our thoughts on whether or not we would in the future consider breeding or if we're giving it the big X of no thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. But breeders are essential to the hobby.
Essential. I mean, literally, I think that's something that a lot of people, we all know that, I think, but it's not something that's like really spoken about too often. But literally, the hobby wouldn't exist without breeders and everything they do and all the work they put in because it is just, it's critical.
And people probably outside of the hobby may not understand the value of breeders because if you look at other animals, like cats and dogs, like people have very strong opinions on dog breeders and cat breeders when there's so many rescues out there. And while yes, there are tons of reptiles that do need homes and do need to be rescued, the vast majority do come from breeders. And if we're not breeding them, then we are getting them from the wild, right? And we're taking them from their homes.
And that's exactly why they're so crucial. It's because we don't want to be, as pet keepers, we don't typically want wild caught specimens for all the reasons we'll talk about in another conversation. But we don't want to be doing that. So if we want ethically bred, good, safe reptile pets who don't have any issues or anything like that, and there can obviously be issues regardless of where you get them, but your best bet,
chance possible,
your
right,
best
of having a healthy animal
is getting them from a breeder.
Captive bred.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And then those breeders will be the ones who are taking on the challenge of dealing with wild caught animals, and that's so they can keep their bloodline healthy because we want to avoid inbreeding, multiple generations,
that's
and
something
diversifying the bloodline.
I think a lot of people don't think about that until you're really deep into the hobby and then you really start to realize how critical that is.
Because when you have multiple generations, like I think most people are okay with like one generation of inbreeding, but beyond that, like you have to diversify your bloodline. So you typically either are buying from other breeders who have different bloodlines than what you have, or you're getting a wild caught animal that has a brand new bloodline separate from what you have.
Which is great, but risky.
Yes.
So breeders take on a lot of the risk for us, which I think is really good.
Yes. So then we as pet keepers can have these healthy animals that have the diverse bloodline, that don't have tons of parasites or health issues, that have known lineage and history. Like, we know what to expect. And in theory, we have strong understanding of what their care requirements are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then there's the other side of breeding that I don't know if we want to get into all this, but there is the mass breeding side of things that is, being supplied into pet stores and things like that. And that's kind of the darker side of breeding.
Quantity over quality. Right. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something that a lot of people know about, but it's very similar to like the puppy mills that everybody knows about.
I just got a comment the other day on my TikTok talking about like, things I wish people knew before getting a chameleon. And one of them was like, I wish people would buy from reputable breeders and not chain stores. And the comment was like, well, don't the stores get them from local breeders? And I was like, no.
You hope so, but typically no.
And I will say like local reptile shops usually get their supplies from local breeders, right? Like who buy them at wholesale price and go that route. But when you're talking Petco, PetSmart, Pet Supplies Plus, all those guys, it is not likely they're buying from.
They might have. I will say, like, it always, when it comes to chain pet stores, which we will do a whole other episode on.
Oh, yeah.
But when it comes to that, there are some that do that, but it's typically certain species that are harder to get, like the less common ones. Yeah. Versus like all the most common reptile species are almost always coming from a mass breeder.
Yep.
And that's just, like I said, that's the darker side of things.
And that goes to what we were saying before of like the cons, right, of not having. So you have, in theory, poor genetics, not a strong bloodline, right? Like there's just all these health issues within the animal that like, even if you give them best care possible, not working in your favor.
And that's where it's just, you're not being set up for success from the beginning, which is the hardest thing.
And that's totally heartbreaking. So if we're looking at quality breeders, people who are doing this with the best of intentions, like I think it's important that we discuss things that you could or should consider when thinking about becoming a breeder, and we can give our 2 cents on like what we want to discuss. But a big one is space.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah,
for me personally, like I never want to get into breeding. That is my own thing. And
I have interest in breeding. So this will be a good back and forth conversation.
Yeah. I personally don't want to get into breeding. And one of the big reasons is space, because for me personally, my space is limited. So I would rather save that space for long-term pets over temporary babies. For me, that's a big thing.
Let me ask you this, because I only have my chameleon hat on, but do other reptile species, say like snakes, geckos, etc., obviously geckos only have 2 eggs, so they only have 2 at a time, but like snakes will have larger clutches, multiple babies. Do breeders typically raise those individually, or they house them all together?
So it depends, and this gets into like the ethics of it all and all that stuff. But the most common practice when it comes to snakes, and again, just major disclaimer, we are not breeders. No. We are novice keepers. Or not novice keepers, but we are keepers, pet keepers in particular. So these are all just kind of like our understanding of things.
And observations, right? That we've seen through other breeders and stuff.
But for me, it seems like what I've seen is the standard with snakes is they do separate them typically, but in a pretty small tub or rack system. And that's usually the case. And when it comes to breeding, I'm actually not against that for the babies, because that actually is a like proven way to ensure that they're eating, specifically ball pythons.
Sterile.
Very sterile, easy to clean, easy to monitor, make sure that they're, there's no mites, there's no issues, there's no, their poops are good, their poops are healthy, like all those kind of things. And that is critical for breeding. So I think when the babies are being raised up in a rack system for a temporary amount of time before they're sold, I'm usually pretty okay with that.
And then the space requirements of a rack is you can have significantly
much smaller.
Yes, you can have way more snakes in a rack system than you could in giant enclosures. In the chameleon hobby, we've been seeing this push towards individually raising your chameleon. So chameleons typically have clutches ideally around 20 to 30.
Crazy.
Up to
so many.
Over 60 though.
I know. It's like wild.
Imagine you have 2 veiled chameleons that you just happened to get. You didn't know you were supposed to keep them separate. Boom.
It's mind blowing.
60 babies.
Yeah. Crazy.
What are you doing?
That's insane.
With 60 babies. And how are you supposed to have 60 individual enclosures?
Like, that's actually, I'm not going to lie, that's terrifying. I don't know about you, but I personally have
That's
the
an
nightmares.
entire room.
I have literal nightmares where, like, I will walk into my reptile room and new animals have just spawned out of nowhere. And I'm like freaking out because all of a sudden I have 3 lizards in a tank and I don't know what to do. That is a recurring nightmare that I have. So the thought of all of a sudden having 60 babies actually terrifies me.
Oh my gosh. I just had a nightmare. I don't know if it's a nightmare, but it was like this weird, like when you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't have to get up right now. So you fall back to sleep, but you're not in deep sleep. So like I will always have super funky dreams.
Weird dreams, yeah.
And I had someone who was like bringing their dog over for dog sitting. Yeah. And they were like, hey, just so you know, like she's on dubia roaches. Like their dog. And I woke up and I was like, that wasn't real. What? Dogs don't eat roaches. But
Dogs don't eat bugs. Although I will say my dog goes around the house and finds little millipedes and spiders. And he does do
but
that.
This was like, the owner was specifically like, hey, like we're putting her on a new diet right now. Like she's on dubia roaches.
It's like a fancy like new diet.
Because like dogs are allergic to food and stuff.
Yeah.
So she was like, yeah, she's on dubia roaches. And I was like, oh, no worries. Like I have plenty of those.
Tons. I got a whole closet full.
That literally was my dream. So if we're talking about like weird reptile nightmares, like we all have them.
I know that the spawning reptiles nightmare is a recurring one for many people. Yeah. I know that that's a relatable one, but that's my biggest fear.
So going back to the space thing, right? Yeah. So I'm hoping to breed Venus and Neptune, who are my panther chameleons. If you can keep your female chameleon at slightly lower temperatures and not feed them all the time, in theory, you can impact how many legs she's laying, so she's closer to the 20 to 30 count. So I'm mentally preparing myself to have 20 to 30 individual enclosures for each of these babies.
I don't know how you do that.
I mean, they're not full size, like
I know, they're
2 foot,
little.
4 foot.
Right.
You know, but the space requirement is huge. And the alternative would be that you would have, you know, maybe like 5 to 10 chameleons like in one enclosure.
But then you risk like tail nips and different things. I know chameleons are a little different. I don't know all
tail
the
nips
details.
for sure.
That's what I thought. Like
they'll fight each other and there'll be runs and breeders are like, oh yeah, this is the run. I'm like, well, if they're all getting food, like there shouldn't be
a run.
Runs. Yeah. And they'll have like physical deformities because they'll like be picking on each other.
Yeah,
and
it's
like
not. You see it all the time with crested geckos and leopard and African fat-tailed geckos because at least from what I hear, breeders do it differently. Some separate, some don't. It really just varies. I know with crested geckos, they often don't separate. I don't think. I could be wrong. I know specifically the breeder that I got my gargoyle and my cresty from didn't separate them, which again, you know, to each their own.
Yeah.
But a big sign of them is if the crested geckos, if they've dropped their tails, leopard geckos, African fat-tailed geckos, because if they're kept, you know, together as babies, so they lose their tail.
Yeah. Very stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the hobby would really benefit from more breeders who are focusing on smaller clutches, right? Or smaller, or just on one species versus going for
focusing just
where
on
you
species.
have like one species that you're really passionate about, or you know there's not a lot of breeders for that species, but you have a pair that are unrelated and you could really make a difference. And just like I don't have intentions of having this huge breeding project, right? Like of just having Neptune and Venus, at least one clutch, maybe
two at a max. Yeah.
Like who knows what the future holds, but I don't currently have any intentions of having like multiple females and multiple males and multiple clutches and tons of eggs.
You're going into it with the right intentions of like starting small and seeing how it goes. Like, and I think it depends. Like there are definitely some breeders who go into it more with that mindset of like, this is a hobby. I'm excited to, you know, see how it goes, learn something new, like learn lots of just, you know, new experiences, like all those things. And then there's also the side of it where, you know, people try to get into it for the money. And from what I've always heard from breeders is like, if you're in it for the money, you shouldn't be literally
on my list. Yeah. The cost associated with
is huge.
And like, I think it's so easy to get caught up in the price tag of reptiles. Panther chameleons, males are going $500 a piece.
That blows my mind. I got Barney for $378.
Neptune was $275.
Like, That's crazy how astronomically high the price has gotten. It blows my mind.
So when you're looking at like $500 a pop, granted that's for males, and females are usually priced a little bit lower. Yeah. So like average it out to like $200 or $300, 20 to 30 babies. Like you're like, oh, like I could make a lot of money.
But you're not thinking about all the enclosures that you have to buy if you're just starting out. All the insects you have to
lighting,
buy. Yeah,
right? You have to buy
huge.
all those lights. The sheer amount of pinhead crickets and like
so many pinhead crickets.
Flightless fruit flies. I almost said fruitless.
I heard
flight
that.
flies.
I was gonna brush right past it.
Flightless fruit flies, and you just have to have a constant supply. Yeah, because each baby is eating like 50 bugs a day.
A ridiculous amount of bugs a day. Yeah,
times 30. Yeah. Like it's an insane amount of bugs, and then you're raising them for multiple months. This is not just like hatch them and
it's not like
goodbye.
A 2-week situation. This is like typically I know with chameleons it's usually like 4 months, right? 3 to 4. Yeah.
3 months is the minimum.
3 to 4. I don't know what it is for. I think ball pythons it's probably around 3 to 4. I think that's fairly common for like most
to get them established before
species.
Shipping them and all that. So there's just a lot of upfront cost with
tons
breeding, and then
that's another reason I don't want to do it. I'm like, I would rather just, because for me, the way I view it, if I'm going to be spending money on my animals, it's for my animals.
Yeah.
Like,
not someone else's.
I don't want to spend money raising somebody else's animal.
Yeah. No, I totally get that.
Even though obviously I know you would make some profit off of it and like all of that, but it's just a lot to take on.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah. And then the time.
Yeah.
So like I know when the eggs are going to be close to hatching, they're like, I'm not going on any vacations.
No,
I am home for the next 3 to 4 months.
You are baby chameleon mama.
Yeah.
For 3 to 4 months.
I'm going to be a grandma.
Yeah, grandma, actually. That's the right word, yeah.
No, but like it's daily care.
Oh, yeah.
And not just like once a day. Like babies are eating twice a day, in the morning and the evenings. Like you got to make sure those little things stay alive.
Well, like just minor example that is it's definitely not a breeding example, but like when I got Nessie, my African fat-tailed gecko, I hadn't had a baby reptile.
Oh yeah.
And I think like at least 3 years. Like at that point, all my reptiles had been like older. Yeah. And there's also a big difference between like a baby snake or a baby gecko. Like that's very different.
Yeah, you're talking about like frequency of eating and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like so when I got her, I was like, oh, I forgot like how much daily work this is.
And like Venus was taking down like 20 roaches a day.
Right.
So I'm like putting in roach orders, and she's eating different size bugs than the rest of my animals are too.
That was another issue that I had
to get extra smalls just for her.
Literally. Because that's the same thing happened with Nessie, because I was so used to like my order for my insects had been consistent for like 2 years. Yeah. So I was just doing the same order. And then I was like, oh, I have to like do baby bugs.
Yes.
Like little tiny bugs. Like,
yes. And you have to get tiny roaches, and you got tiny worms, and then tiny black soldier fly.
It's a whole other ball game having a baby animal versus an adult animal. It's just a completely different time requirement. And so it's
now talk about a hatchling.
I can't even
so like
contemplate that.
The time, and again, I'm only talking in the scope of like one clutch.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now you look at other breeders who have
dozens and dozens. Like, man, more power to you. Couldn't be me.
Hundreds of babies.
Couldn't be me.
Excuse me.
No.
Like
my brain gets stressed out even just thinking about that. I'm overwhelmed.
That's why I'm like, if you're in this for the money, for breeding, like this is not. There's much better ways to make money than
probably a lot easier ways. Yeah, for sure.
Breeding reptiles. So the time commitment is huge.
But I think if we want to get into, and I don't know if we're there yet on kind of the structure of this, but like that kind of also goes into vetting a breeder a little bit of like that. I think is one of the big differences between the really ethical breeders and the breeders who, you know, are maybe cutting corners, things like that, because the breeders that you want to buy from are the ones who aren't in it for the money, are the ones who are like, it's a passion project.
Yep.
Those
They're
are the
ones
best breeders
that will answer every single question you have, that will have that lifelong relationship with you, that are making sure that you are set up, but it's also their animal, right? Like they spent all this time
and they take pride in
raising them. And so they want to make sure they're going to
Yep.
a good home versus just whoever is going to take them.
Several of my pets all came from smaller breeders that were passion projects at expos, things like that. And those are my favorite ones to catch up with when I see them at expos.
When they're like, this is their hatch date, these are their parents, this is their favorite bug, or this is their favorite rodent or whatever. Like, you can tell they have spent so much time
it's crazy.
with this animal versus other breeders where they don't even know the hatch date or the lineage. They just see them as
Nessie,
a number.
we're talking about Nessie a lot in this episode, I guess, because she's the last like baby reptile I bought. So it just is at the top of my mind. But Nessie's breeder is one of my favorite and best breeders that I've seen in a long time because
he's so much fun to talk to.
I love talking to him every time we see him at expos. He's just so kind, and he keeps wanting me to put out a bioactive care guide for him and like help him with that. Yeah. And I want to, but I just haven't gotten her in that yet, but it's coming very soon. But what I loved about him when I was getting her, she was another kind of impulse purchase. It was an impulse purchase. I knew exactly how to care for her and what she needed.
She was on the list. You just weren't expecting to get her that day.
Moment. Yeah. And so when I found her, he literally had labels printed out for every single baby that he had that could potentially be sold at this expo.
Yep.
On that label, it had their hatch date, their parents, their genetics. It had the date that they had last eaten. It had their weight. It had everything you needed to know for this animal. And that was wild to me. I had never had a breeder give me all of that information.
It seems like very basic information and stuff you would want to know, especially when purchasing a snake, of like when their last meal was, right? Or like
especially what snakes,
what size feeder are they on, or like stuff like that. Like as the person who's now taking responsibility to care for them, like that's good.
Big thing.
Or their last poop, right? Like I know that's big with snakes.
Huge, yeah.
Like,
And so all of that stuff he had on a label in the cup that he gave her to me in.
Yeah.
It was the most well-organized, brilliant thing, but it seems obvious.
So we've talked about this in the last episode, that reptile tracker, like journal PDF thing that I've made. I was like, why aren't breeders providing something like this for
that would be such a clutch thing to have.
Right. Of like, in it is like about your pet, and you can fill in like literally their hatch date, the breeder, like their lookout, all this. And then you could have that, and then you could have their food schedule of like, this is what they've eaten.
That's one of the questions. If I'm at an expo or talking to a breeder and I'm interested in getting an animal, that's one of the first questions I ask is, when did they last eat? What are they eating?
Well, we're honest. Those are the questions I ask, because you'll be all excited.
That's true. This is true. Once I've decided on the animal, I know to ask all those questions. But
you get all shiny and like excited, and I'm like, okay, but let's ask the important questions. Yeah, those are important boxes to check.
And going back to Nessie's breeder, he also handed me a care sheet that on one side had leopard geckos and on the other side had African fat-tailed gecko.
And they have little enclosures too, right? Like that you can like have everything that you need, at least for like a starter enclosure for babies and stuff like that.
I would say more of a quarantine setup versus starter, but like just the bare minimum basics. So it was just so cool to see, like it was so apparent to me that he wanted to make sure that every baby he sold was going to have a good home, a good environment, and that the person that is buying it is set up for success.
Feel the excitement and the passion and like, I don't know, it sounds cheesy, but like, you know, it really, you can tell.
In my opinion, if you're shopping for a reptile, if you are at an expo and you are vetting breeders and you're talking to these breeders, if they aren't excited to talk to you, or if they are brushing you off or just quickly answering questions, and obviously expos are busy. I know they have, you know, there's a lot to do at expos and there's a lot of people to talk to. I get all that. But if somebody is trying to buy an animal and you're being kind of brushed off, that's usually not a great sign.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, something that I think is important is like, how excited are they to tell you about the animal and do those things?
Why are you breeding in the first place, right? And that was a question that I had to answer for myself. I was like, okay, I'm making the decision. I want to take on this challenge, like, of why you want to breed.
What were your whys?
My big thing was because of the platform that I have, in like putting out so much chameleon care content. I would love to lead by example. Yeah. And I would love to show people this is the ideal scenario for breeding chameleons.
I love that.
And like, I will be doing it by the book and then some, like individually raising all these chameleons versus just like throwing them all into one enclosure, I think is a huge opportunity that is unique to me versus other keepers. But I said for the longest time, like, I wasn't going to breed Neptune because I'm like, there are plenty of panther chameleon breeders out there who are doing a fabulous job. Like, his lineage is not unique or special. In fact, I don't even know his lineage because I got him from a pet shop, right? So, like, I don't know who his parents are. You don't know all the
details.
No. I know Venus's lineage because she came from a breeder, but, like, I don't know Neptune's.
That's a great point. I forget that you don't know his. I got my panther chameleon from a breeder, so I always knew the parents and everything. So I forget that.
I don't know his history.
And that's not the case for most of my pet reptiles. I don't know the lineage for most of mine, but Barney was special. I knew all his details.
But I know, like, the opportunity and the platform I have to lead by example and, like, have future generations of chameleon keepers. Be like, I'm not going to do it until I can have space
until you can do it right.
Yes. Yes. So that was the big motivator for me. And then a kind of like selfish thing is like, I wanted a Neptune.
You want a Neptune baby.
Yeah.
I want a Neptune baby.
Yeah. Because he's turning 6 years old this year, and average life expectancy is 5 to 7 years. So he's right in that, like, upper age range. And so my whole brand is Neptune the Chameleon. So I'm like, how special would it be to have
his legacy?
Yeah. Once Neptune is passed, like, but like the name will continue on and his legacy will continue on through like hopefully keeping one of his his babies. So
big time.
Yeah, but I think you have to have the best of intentions with going into it, and I think like diversifying the bloodline, like,
that's always always a good one,
is huge, right? And so that's just something to
I love it. Those are great whys. Those are fabulous reasons.
Big thanks to Pangea Reptile for the support of the podcast. They're one of the leading companies for reptile supplies, lizards, and their world famous gecko food.
They just released their brand new micro feeding dishes made specifically for baby or micro geckos. These smaller dishes can be mounted to smooth surfaces and even branches and will help stop your gecko from getting food all over their enclosure. If you own a gecko, you know exactly how nice it'll be to not have to clean food paw prints everywhere.
Head on over to PangeaReptile.com to check out these new micro dishes along with their other amazing products like their face packs for shipping, chameleon kits, and gecko food. GoldCoastRoaches.com is a small family business in Southern California whose goal is to provide the best food for the best pets. They have a great variety of feeder roaches available, including dubia roaches.
But for all of our listeners in Florida, where dubia roaches are illegal, they also have Madagascar hissers, red runners, lobster roaches, orange heads, discoids, and death head roaches, plus an assortment of worms. So if you're looking to add in more variety to your pet's diet, give them a try.
Order ship Monday through Wednesday with a satisfaction guarantee. Use code TheWildType10 to receive 10% off your first purchase. So one thing that we haven't talked about is finding these babies homes.
That's the other reason I don't want to breed.
So we're at the point now you have these 3 to 4 month olds, you know, like they're nice and healthy. Like, how do you find them somewhere to go?
You're lucky because
I already have a wait list. People DM me all the time. I literally have a note in my phone of people who have said that they wanted a Neptune Venus baby. Yeah.
But so I feel very confident that you would have a lot of homes, but there are situations where people can't sell babies. And I think this is something we very briefly, minorly touched on a little bit ago, but like there are some species that I quite frankly don't think we need that many more breeders for, because there's too many of the species out there in rescues, in bad situations, in those mass breeding situations.
Like, why are you breeding in the first place, right? Are you adding to the hobby? Are you improving the species and the bloodline? And
just because you have 2 ball pythons doesn't mean that the world needs more ball pythons, guys. Like that's, it's some of those most commonly kept species like ball pythons, leopard geckos, even African fat-tailed geckos. They're a little more crested geckos. Those are so oversaturated in the hobby, in my opinion. And I think when there's oversaturation, there's the potential for culling and things like that, which is unfortunately when they essentially kind of get rid of the excess of those babies.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've heard from the grapevine, maybe we'll put it that way, of breeders who do that. Yeah. Because they're unable to sell them, or they're not desirable coloration, or they're not desirable, the males are typically more sought after than the females are. And so the females are not, you know.
And I want to be clear too, we're not talking about the animals with like severe birth defects that like won't make it. Like those are slightly different situations.
These are animals that are
perfectly
100% healthy. And the breeder is just choosing to get rid of them
instead of taking the time and the effort to continue raising them until they can find buyers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I understand, you know, the breeding comes with, you know, if you have animals that you can't sell, that's a money suck. That's a money hole.
But it's also a commitment you made when you decided to breed your animals.
And that's when it comes down to ethical breeding and non-ethical breeding, in my opinion. And if you're going into it without your morals and ethics head on straight, then you end up in those situations and you're making some pretty negative impacts, in my opinion.
This is the most politically correct way for us to try and have this conversation without saying what we really want to say.
I'm trying so hard not to be too opinionated on it.
This is messed up stuff, okay? People it is a horrific practice. And like, I can feel my blood like
me too. I'm like, calm down.
Starting to boil at the thought of people thinking that this is an acceptable thing to do. Because if you were taking on the responsibility of, like, I am fully prepared to raise 20 to 30 chameleons to like for 7 years.
Or even like worst case scenario, you end up with 60. You know, you would make it work.
Yeah.
You would figure it out.
Yes, I absolutely would.
Do you want that situation to happen? No. Hell no. You don't want that to happen at all. But if it were to happen, you would handle business. Prepared.
And I have a plan A, I have a plan B, I have a plan C. Yes. Like Venus's breeder has already offered to purchase the future babies at wholesale price if need be.
That's incredible.
Right? Yeah. Like, if you can't sell them, like we will take the babies and we will sell them for you. Yeah. And like, we are blessed to have local reptile shops that I have really good relationships with that I know would also purchase them. However, like having a social media presence, I think is huge for breeders. Yes. Because then your number of customers is exponentially more, and you can take people through the process. They get emotionally invested, and the parents, they can see your care behind the scenes. They can make sure that you're legit in taking care of your animals. So like, I don't know, I think it was Bill over at Chameleon Academy. Like, he has like step by step, here's how to breed chameleons, and one of them is like, before you even have eggs, get a social media account. Absolutely. Get that presence, get that audience. So those are potential future customers.
It helps set you up for being put in that situation where you're like, I don't know what to do with these animals. Like, I can't, hold on to them. What do I do? And it helps that situation. Yeah. And it just makes it mitigates it a little bit.
Yeah. So if you don't have a solid plan for finding homes for your reptiles,
shouldn't do it.
No. And like, again, I'm in the chameleon world, so we're dealing with like literally 50 babies, and these people have veiled chameleons that they didn't even realize were a male and a female, or they come with like already gravid female, so it's like a fertile clutch, and they're like, what am I like? How am I going to, or they're like, I really want to breed. And I'm like, hey, do you have a plan?
Yeah. Because this is like intense.
Homes.
This is like these are a lot of lives, a lot of mouths to feed.
And you can't just go to Petco and be like, I have all these babies. Will you? So this is like a huge part, like, yes, time, yes, space, yes, money, like blah, blah, blah. Those are important.
But the plans and the organization.
Finding them homes.
That is a big part of the process.
And I plan on having like a questionnaire, right? Like, you got, they do that for like other animals.
And I think that's part of it too. I think some breeders will sell to just about anybody. Yeah. And I think that kind of goes into the ethics of it too. Like, I understand, you got to sell the babies. Like, I totally get that. But I think there is something to be said about the breeders who are picky about who they give those babies to. I love those breeders. Yep. Please be picky. That is your animal that you produced, you raised, you took the time and energy to have, and you want to make sure that that animal lives its life to its fullest potential. Yep. And I think that, the breeders who take that pride in it to make sure that each customer is set up for success with the animal that they have. You best
believe there's going to be like an interview process and like, you have to fill out this questionnaire and like, and
you're not getting my baby.
No.
If you don't know what you're doing.
No. And that's not to say, because a lot of people associate your experience and knowledge with like having already owned reptiles.
Yeah, no. And like, you can be a totally new keeper and know your stuff. Yes. And be all on top of it.
Yes.
I mean, that's like, you're the prime example of that. You had never had any reptile before and you got a chameleon and you did it right from day one. So like, it's not impossible, but you're also not going to sell your babies to somebody who isn't going above and beyond to set that animal up for success.
Nope. Yeah. Yeah. You couldn't pay me to do to do that. Yeah. Absolutely not. Yeah. There's just like, with great power comes great responsibility in intentionally choosing to bring life into this world, even if it's a reptile life, right? Because I know people say that with like babies, okay? But even with scaly babies, okay? This is like a very big...
It's still a life that you are choosing to actively bring into this world.
A big commitment, and it should not be taken lightly. So I hope this is food for thought for anyone who's maybe considering becoming a breeder, or maybe you're just a pet keeper and you have zero interest, but this is just like
me.
Yeah.
No interest.
But maybe this is just interesting conversation because you're like, oh, I never thought about that. Or when you're looking to purchase an animal, then you can have these conversations with your future breeder.
And I think it's just an important conversation too, just because I feel like sometimes it's really easy in the whole like world of like ethics in reptile keeping that, you know, you can kind of fall into a little bit of a anti-breeder hole sometimes.
Sure.
And I totally understand that. There are plenty of breeders out there who do not do things
and
ethically.
Lots of rescues
that need homes. I'm all for it. But I think it's an important topic because there are so many facets to breeding when it comes to the reptile keeping hobby that are crucial, because we wouldn't be able to have this hobby if we didn't have breeders.
Yes. And we need new generations of breeders, right? People coming in behind them, right? Or specializing in those species that don't have a big breeder presence. Because, I mean, exportations have closed off previously. And so nothing's saying that like, hey, we won't be getting any new bloodlines coming in, and we are 100% dependent on what we have available to us.
Yeah.
No pressure. No pressure.
There's just so many levels to all this. So it's always good to try and talk about it as best we can. Yeah. You know.
And I'll keep you guys, you know, in the loop as I get into the breeding project with...
I'm excited for you.
With Venus and Neptune. I'm really hoping this year's the year
I hope that so too.
Breed, because incubation is 9 months.
I want to see the babies.
Oh my gosh. You squirts.
They're so cute.
Little itty bitties.
I can't wait.
Yes. So I think that wraps it up though, right? So,
yeah. I don't have any other. That was
the breeder conversation.
Pretty much all my breeding notes. Yeah. So I think I'm good.
And we'll have future discussions on breeders. Like maybe we could get into the nitty gritties of like how to find a good breeder. I know we want to do one on
the questions of like everything you need to vet. We briefly touched on that, but
all the
details.
I feel like we can get into the into the weeds,
nitty gritty
with that one. Yeah.
Agreed.
So we're gonna switch it up. Well, this has nothing to do with reptiles, but I know we're talking the other day of like how when you get busy with your life and friends and things like that, like it's sometimes easy to, I don't necessarily want to say excuse, but kind of like a cop out of just, you know, when you're like haven't heard from those friends, or you're like talking to a guy and like you're not really getting, you know, much of a response.
And you get the classic answer of, oh, I'm so sorry. I've just been so busy.
Yeah, that is like... Especially when there's been no communication. Yeah. And that's my thing. Like, we all get busy. Like, you get it, I get it,
I just went through wedding season. That was my number one excuse for 6 months.
Yeah. I get it. If someone would reach out to you and you were just swamped, like, you do such a great job of this. I really admire this about you and your friendships. But you will say, like, hey, I'm swamped this week. Hey, I'm super busy.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're like, but can you do, like, this time, or can you meet in like 2 weeks from now? Like,
I'm literally the first person to be like, hey, I simply cannot. There is not a minute in my schedule this week that I have time, and I'm so sorry about it.
But you let people know.
But this is when I do have time. Yes. I can do it on this day. That's the time that I have available. Does that work for you?
No, and that's how it should be. Yeah. Like, I get that we all are busy, but to me, like, being busy is a matter of priority of like, how do you want to spend your time? And sometimes those priorities change, and sometimes that person was at the top and then something else was like.
And I think too, like, we obviously in this conversation, we're talking about it in terms of friendships and potential relationships and dating and stuff. But I think when it comes to like the friendships and things like that, friendships ebb and flow. Like there is so many, like there are times when, you know, you're like at the closest you've ever been with those friendships. And then there are times that, you know, it's like, oh, we haven't talked in a month. I need to like make that effort.
Yeah.
But I think like that's something that I pride myself on and that like is really, really important to me. Like I almost keep like a mental tally in the back of my head with my friendships of like, okay, I haven't talked to her in a hot minute. I need to make that
I make
effort.
the rounds. I'm like, hey, dun, dun, dun. Oh, I gotta reach out to you.
Right.
Dun, dun,
And
dun.
it's,
Oh, I gotta reach out to you.
and I think it just depends on like how you value those friendships and like you said, the priorities. I think that's really important. Yeah. And for me, friendships have always been like one of my highest priority in my life.
Huge. Yeah. Yeah. And especially as like different seasons, you it was a fabulous point you make. Like I have a lot of friendships that are long distance, right? Like we used to live in the same place, but like we no longer don't. So it's no longer a friendship out of convenience or proximity. You now have to make the intentional effort.
Intentionality is everything.
And life just gets so busy. I get it. But to just like not make any effort to communicate when things pick up or things get out of control, to me, if you're swamped or you're busy and you can't talk, just let me know.
Yeah, literally.
Like just say, I'm like being proactive about it, not being like, hey, it's been this stretch of time. I haven't heard from you when I'm used to hearing from you. And then you're like,
right. Well, and I think that lends to like thoughtfulness. And I think I'm somebody that I prefer people in my life who are very thoughtful. It was quite literally one of the first things that I noticed about my husband when I was dating him of like, wow, this man really thinks about other people. And I'm someone that like, I'm very thoughtful with my friendships and things like that. Yeah. But I am someone that like, I can get a little sidetracked and get a little, like, I'm not always the most thoughtful. Yeah. Like, and so it was something that like, I saw a lot of value in him. And I was like, that's something that I want to be better about. And so it helped, you know, and so I think finding people who are like really thoughtful with those things. And if somebody isn't thoughtful, to me, that just tells me that like, A, I don't matter enough to you. B, you may or may not care. And C, like just that's going to lead to a friendship or a relationship kind of like winding down.
My,
you know,
like favorite text to get from a guy, like especially when you're new to dating, is the like, I'm thinking about you text without actually saying I'm thinking about you. Yeah. But it's just them like out of nowhere just sending you that like funny meme or just like a smiley face or just like a, you know, just like a, hey, you know, whatever. Just in the middle of the day, like you had no prior conversation that would lead up to that, but you could tell like you just popped into their head and they're like, hey, I'm super swamped, I'm super busy, but just like hope you're having a good day.
Yeah.
Like,
literally,
those are the best.
If you do that, if a guy does that, if I'm dating and a guy does that to me, you don't have to talk to me for 72 hours. I don't care. I don't care if I don't hear from you for 3 days. Because you let me know. You let me know.
Yeah. Not that you're just like in the thick of it. And I don't need the constant communication. In fact, I'm the kind of girly that I'm like, please
don't
leave me alone. But having that intentional thoughtfulness of like, hey, this person doesn't know what's going on because they can't see that you're swamped and stuff, or you're in this just whirlwind of whatever. Totally. But then just letting them know like, hey, like, can't right now. How about this time? Like, does wonders.
Well, and I have to say too, this even 100% includes people or like couples. When you're in a relationship, you still actively have to do those things. It's not just when you're dating. It's not just when you're friends. Like you actively still have to do those
communication.
Things. Yes.
Basic communication.
Like I will sometimes go and like work at a coffee shop and not see my husband for like 4 or 5 hours. And like almost all of the time during that, I get a text from him that's like, hey, love you. Hey, see you when you get home. Like something like that. And it's like
so nice.
Those little things make people feel cared for.
Yes.
And loved and appreciated. And those are just critical, whether it's in friendship, dating, anything. I just think it's so important.
So I just want to challenge anyone listening, like this next week, when you have that friend or that loved one or whatever that just like pops into your head, just out of the blue,
text them.
Just send them a text.
Just text them.
Doesn't have to be anything heartfelt or deep or whatever. It could literally just be a smiley face. I send my grandma random emojis all the time because I'm just like, my grandma pops into my head. I'm just like, wink.
No, like one of my best guy friends that I've known since I was like 16 lives across the country, and I love to just like, I'll just send him something and be like, hey, somebody said this the other day and it totally made me think of you, or like whatever.
You know what popped in my head? The Facebook poke.
Yes.
Feature?
No, that's literally exactly what it is. That's exactly, back in the day we would poke people on Facebook, and now you just send them a text.
Yeah. But it to me is like to be proactive about it versus reactive of like, hey, sorry, I was busy or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it especially in today's day and age, like we are on our phones constantly.
All the time.
Like to say you're too busy to send someone a text to like loop them in on what's going on, to me is just a poo-poo excuse.
Well,
and we're better than that.
And this again goes for dating or friendships. If you tell me that you're too busy, like that typically just tells me that you're just not thinking about me, and if they wanted to, they would, kind of a thing.
I saw this. So it's the if they want to, they would. And then someone's like, reframe it. If they don't, someone else will.
Accurate.
And that was my new motto in 2024. Not if they want to, they would. If they don't, someone else will.
I 100% prefer that saying.
Yep.
That is on point.
Which is so true. Like step up or step aside.
Yeah.
You know?
Trust me, there's plenty of other people.
Yeah.
Plenty of other fish in the sea.
We are prioritizing quality friendships. We are making the effort. We are showing up for our friends, significant others, loved ones, grandmas, whoever, and just, let them know that you're thinking about them.
Yeah.
It'll make their day, and then one day you're going to get that text in return, and you're just going to
100%.
You're going to love it. So
I agree.
I think that's so important. Again, had nothing to do with reptiles, but it's something that we had chatted about, and I think is important and top of mind for a lot of people.
And whether it's dating, friendships, and all of the above. I mean, it's just being thoughtful in your relationships and making the time or effort for people.
Huge.
Or just communicating. That's all you got to do.
The basics, man. Nothing crazy over here. Just the good old communication. Yeah.
Well,
are we going to call it?
I think that wraps us up.
All right, call it Happy Tuesday, guys. For anyone listening or if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe.
Yeah.
We're trying to
Instagram, TikTok, YouTube.
Yeah.
So we're at the Wild Type Podcast and all the things.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm Neptune the Chameleon.
And I'm Lyssa Lizards.
And we'll catch you in the next one, guys.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.